Hello everyone, this is Jared again with Dungeons and Javas, helping you stay up to level up. I'm here with some of my friends. I have Andy, I have Clay, and I have Steve. All of them are GMs. We thought we'd do a quick video on, as a GM, what you would expect from your players in role-playing games. So why don't we start off with Mr. Mello. Andy, what do you, what is the top couple things you expect from your players?
Well, I think everybody just wants an engaged player. I think engagement's important. The GM can do all they can and prepare a scenario and do all the legwork and get everybody together and present a story. But if the players don't do their part of engaging in a scenario and engaging in the game, then it's kind of hard to really enjoy it, at least from my end. Because that's what I want. I want my players to be enjoying it, and I kind of feed off of that. So I think that would be number one for me is player engagement and getting involved and doing stuff in the game.
Okay.
For me, it's helping unfold a story. And in order to do that, the players have to have some sort of idea of what their character's backstory is, what their character's motivations are, how they view the world, whether they're religious or whether they turn their back to the known gods, and whether they have their own code of conduct. So if the players come with a concept of their character's backstory, then as the sessions progress, you can tie that in and really adapt the adventure, whether you're running a pre-con one or whether you're writing your own. You can adapt it and involve their character in the story, and that's going to make them feel so much better about having that involvement of their character directly into the storyline rather than just be there to roll some dice.
Right. Okay.
For me, I want to know whether the players are more engaged in the story, whether they're more engaged in the mechanics of the game, whether they, and this is a term that I just heard recently, whether they're, what did somebody call them? Hobo murderers? D&D players who just
murder hobos.
Murder hobos. A phrase I'd never heard before, but people who the only thing they want to do in the game is just find the next treasure or find the next monster to slay, as opposed to people who may be engaged in the story, want to involve their characters and the dynamic of what's going to unfold. So for me, you've got to know your players. You've got to know the expectations that they have.
Right. All right. As a GM, what would you say is your biggest annoyance, like that players do? I'm going to call him out on this video. Hopefully he doesn't watch it, but there's somebody that we play with that is always on his phone playing something.
The world we live in is,
it is.
I think we've kind of talked about it because we all, what a surprise, we all play games together, right? There has to be some kind of like a social contract when you play games with people. It's like, we're adults and we have limited amount of time, and we get together because we love the hobby. But with that being said, your pet peeves as a GM is like you put in a lot of work,
right,
to create this game, this scenario, whatever it is for the players and for yourself, because that's your enjoyment is the creative outlet of creating a story, and then the players have to engage in the process, and to do that you have to put down the phone, because the whole idea of this hobby is a social gathering, as opposed to we're not online, we're not playing a video game, we're together at a table socializing. And so like you've got to get off the phone, not play a game while you're playing a game. Like, why are we getting together to do that? So I think it just comes down to playing a game together and creating a fun atmosphere for everybody. And then I would also, and you guys can piggyback on this, but have a good attitude, right? Don't just show up don't be the lone wolf. Everybody wants to be the lone wolf. I'm the guy who goes off by himself and does everything by himself. Well, that's great. Then go play a game by yourself. We're playing together, so
right.
You have to try to bring the group together and have them work together because it's a cooperative event.
Right. It's a cooperation, not a competition.
Yeah, I'm not saying you can't have like people who have characters that contrast each other. That's also fun, but you can't just do that the whole time and just fight
Right.
the whole game. You've got to figure out how to bring those characters together.
Well, I think to expand on what you're saying is when you play a game, whether it's fantasy or superheroes or something like that, there are tropes, there are stereotypes that you're going to play. You're going to have the brick, which is a typical character type, which is the big muscle, strong, invulnerable type. And then you're going to have maybe the quick martial artist and maybe the planner or the leader. Each one of these is a different trope. And if everyone plays the lone wolf, then you can never have a true team. So within the team, you can have the one loner, and everyone wants to play that. And then you've got to have the team that's willing to work together to solve or to get through the plot. And you've got to be able to rely and trust in one another. Because, if everyone's playing the same trope, the same, I'm going to be Wolverine, I'm going to be the lone wolf, then you're not going to have that exciting of an adventure.
Right.
So,
You're going back to what you were saying, though, about paying attention when it's not your turn. You need to be able to understand what's going on with the other characters so that you can play off of what's happening to their story. And you can, if you're a good player, you can understand what your character's motivations are and how they may either align or conflict with another player's character so that you can role play that and you can bring it out in the story. If you're just waiting for your turn to roll the dice, looking at your phone, and then suddenly you pop up and you hear your name and I attack, and then you go back to what you're doing, you're not contributing anything to the game. You're not helping progress the story. You're not helping to make that a fun night for everybody. So the other aspect that you definitely need to touch on is don't be the character or don't be the player that says, well, my character wouldn't do that. So I'm sorry, Jim, that you spent hours preparing this, certain scenario, but I just decided that my character is going to be obstinate and is going to be a jerk. So what do we do now?
That's a good point. Though, I have as a theater, I teach theater, but it's a great avenue, right? So I learned a lot through gaming before I even got into that of improvisation, and so rules of improvisation apply a lot to gaming. So in improvisation, you offer an idea to somebody and their job is to accept the idea and then build off of the idea as opposed to saying no and shutting it off. And so what you're saying is that the person who's like, well, I wouldn't do that, well, this story is over. We don't know we have to be able to get through it. And like the best example I can give is Han Solo. Han Solo is the lone wolf. He's a smuggler. There's no way he would be involved. He just wants money. But in the story that was written, they find ways to have him start to contribute and adapt and change. He doesn't stay that way forever. He starts that way and then he develops over time.
Right.
And he still has elements of his lone wolf, but he also contributes to the greater story. And therein lies another problem that we've talked about, Steve, of this is not a novel. It's simulating a novel, but every single person's character is the main character.
right. Well, going off what you said, if there's a contract between the GM and the player where the GM creates a plot, and they've got to be able to adapt that plot to their players. And if you think that they're going to go left and they go right, you as the GM have got to modify that. And so that's an expectation that the players have, is that the GM will not lead you down the garden path, will not force you on the railroad tracks and only allow you to do the plot that they've written. But by the same token, the players have got to enter that contract as well. They've got to be able to adapt. If, like you said, if my character doesn't like blue, so I'm not going to go into the blue room, you find a way for that character to work through it, through the other characters encouraging him, getting him past his phobia, that player coming up with a nuance as to why he's willing to do this. The players have got to be able to adapt their characters. You go in to a game with a preconceived conception of what your character is, but like any battle plan, it never survives implementation. The moment you get on the battlefield, things aren't what you expected, and you've got to be able to adapt. So the GM has to adapt their plot, the players have to adapt the way that their characters interact with one another so that you can have a more fluid game.
I think maybe the next thing we should talk about, though, especially if anybody's watching this who are new to game mastering, would be maybe the next thing that I would expect from the players is to accept that the game master in this hobby, a lot of people some people get power to they're like, I am all powerful, I lord. It's not that, but they are the arbiter of the rules. And so one of the problems that can happen with groups and friends is that inevitably a rule or a situation will come up where the ruling goes against the player's
Right.
character, and then there's either hurt feelings or the GM has to make a decision, and the players, as part of the social contract, have to agree to accept that ruling and then talk about it later and don't have it disrupt the game for hours. You can talk about it after the fact. So just make a ruling, and everybody just has to agree, like, okay, that's how we're going to rule it for now, but we can talk about it later.
Right.
We've had that happen before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because I know we've had where, okay, let's keep the game moving. Let's make a decision. This is what we're going to do. We can research it later, like look online or whatever it is, and just move forward. So I think that's a good point.
I think there's also an expectation from the players and the GM on a tangent of that. Players want to bring in their favorite characters. They've read a comic book. They've read a novel. They've seen a movie. They want to bring in their Conan Destroyer. They want to bring in their Iron Man, their Tony Stark. But everyone's got to have an origin story. You cannot bring in the Tony Stark from the last movie. You've got to bring in the Tony Stark from the first movie, where he's got that ad hoc suit that he made, and you've got to start there. You've got to start where Peter Parker learns that he's got powers. You can't start at the ultimate character. And I think a lot of players have the expectation of, I'm going to bring in Conan the Barbarian, or I'm going to bring in Superman, or like, well, we've got to tone it down and build up.
Right.
And so the GM really has to set the expectation of, we're beginning this adventure together and we're going to build it. And if the players want to come along, then they can achieve the better armor. They can achieve, the king of all the barbarian lands. They can achieve, the more dynamic superpowers or whatever. So one of the things that I have found beneficial is either before, but maybe more specifically after a game, talking to the players, getting their feedback. Did you see what you were looking for? What more are you looking for? So do out of game communication with the players to see if you're meeting their needs, to see if they're understanding your plot. Because if every player is just absolutely stumped by the puzzle that you've given them and they don't know how to get past it,
Right.
that's going to shut them down. So you've got to realize, okay, the puzzle's too hard, or I've made it too complex, or I've added too much nuance to it. I need to be a little bit more broader in how I'm going to engage them. Then that allows you to adapt. But you've got to be able to communicate with the players as the GM or vice versa outside of the game. One of the things that I have enjoyed is after a game and talking to a GM and saying, I really appreciated that you did this as a plot or for my character, or seeing the dynamic between these 2 or 3 characters I thought was like the best part of the game. That way you gauge as to whether you're succeeding as a GM and really letting the players enjoy it.
Oh, totally. And I think for me, like, the most successful nights of gaming we've had is when it's over, everybody just starts talking about what happened, and that just tells you, like, okay, that worked, and then we need to probably do more of that. But you have to also, like, we're all very different people, and we all have different wants and needs out of games. You guys like a little high fantasy, you like a little bit more, I like a little darker fantasy, you like a little more heavy role play, I like more of a cinematic balance. But I think you have to understand who your people are that are playing and what do they like, and then try to add a little bit of it in for everybody so they're happy. Like, Jared hates puzzles.
Yes, I do.
So we don't want to put too many puzzles in. So if it's a puzzle-oriented game, we're going to lose Jared for a while, unless it's a relatively like a plot-driven puzzle that's not too difficult, that's just kind of flavorful. But if it's really hard, you might shut down. And then if it's all combat, Steve, you might not love it as much as other people in the game, right? Or if it's too dark or whatever the case may be. I think that is also players, like all the players together, have to kind of understand what game you're playing. You know, if we're going to play Warhammer after playing D&D,
Right.
we have to understand what Warhammer is. You know, deadly, dark fantasy. Your character's going to die and be maimed, right?
Right.
And not everybody knows what that is. And the first time it happens, you're like, what?
Right.
What? My character has no leg? Because that doesn't happen in D&D, right? D&D is more high fantasy and like, you know.
But then you switch to supers where everything is, the heroes are always good guys, and you have to play it that way. You can't play the brooding, everyone can't play the brooding character. So
Yeah, you have to understand what that is because it's not going to appeal to everybody. But I think it's always best to sit everybody down before you start a campaign and be like, all right, this is what this game is, and this is what we're going for. So everybody's on the same page. Otherwise, you have this like really brooding, dark fantasy, you know, Game of Thronesian feel, and then one character's like, "Hey, Skippy the barmaid," you know, it's like that doesn't fit and doesn't feel right.
right.
All right, guys, what's your next pet peeve? What's the next thing that drives you crazy?
So for me, it's when the players always want to have a position of superiority. They don't ever want to have to listen to an NPC to take their advice, to follow their quest. They just want to be able to bully their way past any NPC or anything. If the town guards get called, they want to kill all the town guards. I mean, you have to, as a player, learn how to play your character from a position of weakness, because that allows your GM to lay out a path in front of you or give you options, as opposed to if you just always want to fight the big baddie. A perfect example, one of the Warhammer scenarios that we had was the guy on horseback, the
big no spoilers, but yeah, like the big villain.
Yeah, the head of the and we met him like early on, and he was the head of the underground, and we knew we were outnumbered. We were on horseback at night, and they had just tons of people, and we had to just be like, okay, well, just, you know, don't hurt us type thing, because
Until some of us came up with snide remarks.
I don't know who that was.
But what the point is that we were able to have so much of a cooler experience in that scenario, because we just didn't go in there guns blazing and looking to fight a bunch of characters which were admittedly out of our power level. And that's the other thing, sorry to jump in, but you should be willing as a player. It's okay to run away. It's okay to get into a fight, get over your head, and then get the heck out of there and try and regroup, as opposed to just stubbornly staying until your whole party gets killed. So that's another thing.
Yeah,
To piggyback on that, I think it's important for the players to trust the GM, and I think that gets lost a lot. Is the GM wants to create a story, the GM wants to create something that everyone's going to enjoy. And if the players have had a bad experience in the past or just aren't familiar with it, they always want to be in charge. They always want to be the top dog. And they don't allow for vulnerability. They don't allow for where the plot's going to go, in terms of they will not walk into a blatant trap because they refuse to be, trapped and to die or whatever. Sometimes you want the players to walk into the trap trusting that you will make sure that they get out of the trap without necessarily giving them the key, but allowing them to earn their way out of the trap. And some players just don't give the GMs that latitude or that trust that if he's going to get me into a nasty scenario, or if she's going to get me into a nasty scenario, she's going to make sure that she doesn't kill me or he doesn't kill me before I have a chance to shine.
Well, that's something that you and I have talked about. It's almost impossible as a GM to capture your characters because they never want to be captured. They always want to fight their way out of stuff.
Right.
But some of the coolest scenarios are when you do get captured, you're in a cell, and then suddenly you're having to make do with what you got, talk to other prisoners, learn their story, figure out how you might be able to come together to overcome the guards and get out. I mean, those make for really good scenarios, but if the players aren't willing to ever, this goes again, playing your character is from a position of weakness, then you're not going to get to have some of those experiences.
Yeah, I think inevitably, if you look at, I'm sure someone has done a study on like the psychology of role playing games and why we do it. But like we talked about earlier, everybody wants to be the hero. Nobody wants to fail. Like it's like we want to instantly go in and be able to deal all the damage and win. But if you think about it in stories, the best part of the stories is the weaknesses of the characters. There's a reason why Indiana Jones is a great character, because he's not perfect. Like he fails all the time, and you enjoy that, and he has to overcome even more complications, which makes it more exciting when you actually get to succeed. It's like get captured, have your toenails ripped off by the halfling torture in Warhammer, and then enjoy the moment.
Right.
Right. You don't always get to be perfect all the time. And, again, that sometimes goes into the style of game that you're playing, but the players have to go along with it. Otherwise, it gets kind of boring.
And those are the stories that you hear the players always talking about when they remember a game. So what's your next topic?
How about just personality-wise? Like, be a player that other people want to play with. Be a nice person. Right. Come to the table, have fun, be a person that, not everybody is like gregarious and like outgoing, and that's fine. Some people are very reserved and a little quieter. That's okay. But, you don't want to be the person that everyone's like, oh my God, I can't believe that guy's coming today. You know what I mean? It's like, ultimately we talked about it before, but this is a social, gaming is special because it's social. There's a reason why it's coming back. There's a reason why people play more than they've ever played before in all different types of games, because we're losing the social aspect of society in some ways. We're detached. And so gaming inherently is like, hey, how often do we get to sit around a table with a bunch of friends and play? Well, great, but I want to play with people who are nice, who, are not putting other people down, like, oh my God, why would you do that? What a terrible decision, Steve.
Well, that was the stupidest thing.
Oh my God, Steve, don't do that. You know what I mean? It's like, you don't want that at your table.
And nothing's worse as a GM than hearing one player say, well, I'm going to attack that player. Because you're like, oh, here we go. That's just the end of the night. Just the conflict is out, and that's never going to work out for anybody.
And you also don't get experience for it.
Who's done that? I haven't done that. Wrong. Tim, I'm sorry, he's not here.
But that was a great dynamic between you and Rawl. I mean, you guys didn't get along. Rawl was this wizard.
We had a Rawl. We had another character.
Yeah.
I didn't like him, but I liked Tim. I like the guy who played him, and that's something that's also difficult. Is you got to disassociate between the character and the player, because you can. Yeah, it could be one of those things where they're like, his character totally annoyed my character so much that it became like a ongoing, recurring thing.
Well, I don't know if you experienced it. I'm not into theater as much as you are, but one of the things that I've enjoyed is when I've had an understanding of my character and my character's relationship with another character, and then that player kind of spins it around or changes it up, all of a sudden my dynamic with that person is different. Clay and I did that in a game where he played my older brother, and it's like I thought as an older brother he would support me, but as he read his and understood his character, my character was a total clod, so he was treating me like a clod. So he and I had a lot of fun going back and forth in terms of trying to assert family dynamics. And if somebody was watching the game, they might say, ooh, these guys are going after each other. But out of the game, he and I would talk about how much fun it was and how much things we were able to do and explore in-game that we knew would not affect us outside the game.
Well, that also brings up the thing that you were saying about, with the characters who are, like, contrarian. Like, my character wouldn't do that. Or that's not in my character to do that. Well, it wasn't in my character to like the other character. But that didn't stop me from going and saving him and go in, like, oh my God, he's in trouble. All right, I'm gonna go.
Right.
If I was that bad, if I didn't like him that much, I could just be like, no, I'm not gonna do anything, and then that would disrupt the whole story, and then we have to deal with all of that. It's like, why wouldn't I? Of course I would, because he's my companion. We spar all the time, but so what?
Yeah, and another thing that brought up for me is when you're the player that is I play bards a lot, so I get judged on this a lot, but high diplomacy, you're the face of the group. You always want to step up and you want to take charge and talk about talk to the NPCs, learn what's going on with the story, gather information. Well, you as a player need to understand that there's a limit to how much the other players want to sit around and listen to you go back and forth with the GM. You have to be willing as a player to take a step back and let the other characters have their moment on stage, even if they're not the outgoing gregarious type, even if they're the shy introverted monk. At some point, if the GM's trying to engage them, don't just be like, hey, it's me again, the bard. Let them experience that.
So let's talk about other just basic things too. Be on time.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
No one wants to wait around for you. If we're gonna meet at 6, be there by 5:45 and ready to go.
And be prepared. Don't. Oh, I forgot to print off my character, or everyone else is eating. I'm gonna go grab a sandwich while you guys get started. Be prepared to start.
And if you're not going to be prepared, give your GM a heads up with plenty of time to spare. If you're starting at 6, don't text him at 5:45 or 5:55. Say I'm going to be late. That needs to happen at like 5 or 4:45 or something.
It's the same thing you would do if you have a job. I mean,
Right.
We're making an agreement. We're spending time out of our lives to come and play a game. So be on time and ready to go.
And it affects everyone. It doesn't just affect the GM. It affects all the players there. 'Cause they made the commitment to be there on time, to have their food, to have their dice, to have... I understand you forget your dice, and so, hey, can I borrow some dice or something like that.
Go buy some at Dungeons and Javas. It's right up here.
Right.
It's
But-
extra sets ready to go.
Everyone has made a commitment to the group.
Yeah.
And it's not just impacting one person. It's impacting everybody.
Hopefully, you've gotten something
We've
out
said a
of
lot
it.
of things. I would say to recap. My final thoughts is that if you're a player that's new to the hobby, you can do yourself a favor by being a person that you would like to play with. All right, just being a nice person. Show up on time. Contribute to the game. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Just be open to change. Just think of the character as a person. We evolve and we change over time. So just get off your phone, engage in the game, have a good time. It's a great hobby. If you're a veteran player, then a lot of this stuff that we've talked about, hopefully you've been thinking about, because if you like the hobby, you've been thinking about it, because we do.
Right. And to add on what you said, be willing to be a little improvisational. Be willing to trust your player and your GM. Be willing to show a little bit of vulnerability and weakness, like Clay mentioned earlier. Find your way to invest yourself into the story itself. Don't rely on the GM to be the 100% arbiter of the story. You get to contribute to that, and you get to make the story as much yours as the GM does. So I think that's an important element.
Yeah, have respect for what the GM has done to bring the game to you. Have respect for the other players, and show up hungry and thirsty, because Dungeons and Java is going to have you covered.
And have fun.
There you go.
Have
The whole
fun.
reason that everyone does this is to have a good time.
There you go.
So, all right. Once again, this is Jared and Andy, Clay, and Steve with Dungeons and Javas, helping you stay up to level up.